The first time Harper Callahan grabbed my hand in a parking lot and laced our fingers together like we'd been doing it for years, she also whispered, "Smile like you mean it, Reeves, or my mother is going to smell the lie from the porch." That was the exact moment I understood I was no longer just a guy driving his coworker to a family dinner. I was a prop in a play I hadn't auditioned for, and somehow I still wanted the part. My name is Nathan Reeves. I was 30 years old, a landscape architect at a mid-sized design firm in Asheville, North Carolina, and up until that Friday evening, my biggest professional accomplishment had been convincing a stubborn client that a koi pond did not need actual sharks in it. My biggest personal accomplishment, if you could call it that, was surviving a 4-year relationship that ended with my ex telling me I was, and I quote, "a wonderful foundation, but not a spark." She said it like she was reviewing a house. Solid bones, no chemistry. After that, I stopped trying to be anyone's spark. I became reliable. I watered my plants on schedule, paid my taxes early, and kept my heart filed somewhere between old receipts and expired coupons. Then Harper walked into the office 18 months ago with a portfolio under one arm and an expression that suggested she had already decided the conference room chairs were beneath her, and every carefully filed feeling I owned got knocked loose. She was 28, our firm's newest marketing and client relations coordinator, sharp-tongued, quick-witted, and dangerously good at making everyone in a meeting feel like the smartest person in the room right up until she proved she'd been 3 steps ahead the whole time. She had dark blonde hair she always pinned up messily by 2 p.m., a laugh that came out like she resented enjoying herself, and a habit of leaving sticky notes on my monitor that said things like "Your 3 o'clock rescheduled. You're welcome. Bring me coffee as payment." I always brought the coffee. I told myself it was professional courtesy. It was not professional courtesy. She had a way of remembering things nobody else bothered to notice. She knew I took my coffee black except on days I'd clearly slept badly, when she'd quietly order it with an extra shot without being asked. She knew our senior designer hated being interrupted before 10 in the morning and scheduled around it without ever mentioning why. She once spent an entire lunch break helping our newest intern rehearse a presentation because the kid was shaking too hard to hold his own note cards. And when I found out about it secondhand, weeks later, from the intern himself, she brushed it off like it was nothing worth mentioning. That was the thing about Harper. She did the kind, unglamorous work of paying attention to people and then acted baffled when anyone noticed. I noticed constantly. It became, quietly, a problem. We were friends, the easy kind, the kind built out of shared deadlines and bad vending machine snacks, and inside jokes about our project manager's obsession with beige color palettes. I liked her. Of course I liked her. Anyone with a working nervous system liked her. But I had rules about coworkers, mostly because rule number 1, don't fall for the person who sits 4 cubicles away and can hear you talk to yourself when a spreadsheet crashes, seemed like basic self-preservation. Then came the Friday she appeared at my desk at 4:45 p.m. looking like a woman who had just lost a chess match to her own family. "I need a favor," she said, "and before you answer, I want you to know it is not illegal, mostly not embarrassing, and only slightly insane." I set down my pen. That is the worst opening sentence I've ever heard. "My cousin's engagement dinner is tomorrow night," she said. "My whole family will be there. Aunts, uncles, my grandmother, who once made a man cry by asking if he had prospects. And my mother has spent the last 6 months informing everyone that I am, quote, seeing someone wonderful from work." I blinked. "Are you?" "No," she said, with the particular exhaustion of someone repeating herself. "That's the problem, Nathan." I told her that back in March because she wouldn't stop trying to set me up with her book club leader's grandson, who once explained sourdough starter to me for 40 minutes at a funeral. I panicked. I said I was seeing someone wonderful. From work. It felt safe. Nobody follows up on safe lies. Famous last words. She followed up, Harper said grimly. She wants to meet him tomorrow. I leaned back in my chair, already sensing where this was headed. Already feeling the particular vertigo of a man about to make a terrible decision on purpose. "Harper, I need you to be him. There it was, out loud, in the open, sitting between us like a grenade with the pin already pulled. You want me to pretend to be your boyfriend? I said slowly. For one dinner. One dinner, she confirmed. You show up, you hold my hand. You let my grandmother interrogate you about your intentions. You eat my mother's terrifying casserole. And then we leave, and I quietly tell everyone in a few weeks that it didn't work out. Clean. Simple. No one gets hurt. Nobody gets hurt, I repeated, except possibly me, since I'll be lying to an entire family of trained interrogators. You're excellent under pressure, she said. You once talked a client out of installing sharks. That was different, was it? She tilted her head, and there was something underneath the joke, something almost pleading, that made it very hard to say no. Please, Nathan. I would ask literally anyone else, but everyone else at this company either has a partner already or is Gerald from accounting, and I would rather face my grandmother alone than bring Gerald. I should have said no. I want that on the record. I had an entire mental list of reasons to say no, starting with the fact that I had spent the better part of a year trying not to think about what it would feel like to hold Harper Callahan's hand, and ending with the fact that pretending to feel something you already secretly feel is not acting. It's just very poorly disguised honesty. One dinner, I said instead, because apparently my self-preservation instincts had left the building sometime around lunch. Harper's whole face changed, relief flooding in so fast, it looked like something physical. One dinner, she agreed. Thank you. Genuinely. I will owe you my firstborn child and possibly my car. I don't want your car. It smells like eucalyptus and stress. That's very specific. I've been in it twice. She laughed, and the sound did something unfair to my chest, the same thing it always did, the thing I had spent 18 months pretending not to notice. Where's something nice, she said, already gathering her bag. Nothing too nice. My uncle will assume you're trying to impress him and start talking about his boat. Does he have a boat? He has a very small boat and a very large opinion of it. Understood. She paused at the edge of my desk, and for a second the joking slipped, just slightly, just enough that I caught something underneath it. Thank you, she said again, quieter this time. I mean it. What are fake boyfriends for? I said, and she smiled, and I spent the rest of the evening trying to convince myself that agreeing to this had been a reasonable, low-risk decision made by a rational adult man. It had not been. I picked her up at 6 the next evening, wearing a navy button-down my sister once described as the shirt you wear when you're trying to look like you didn't try, and holding a bottle of wine because showing up empty-handed to meet a family, even a fake one, felt like a rookie mistake. Harper opened her apartment door already dressed, a deep green wrap dress, hair down instead of pinned up, and for one full second I forgot every line I'd rehearsed on the drive over. You look. I started. Don't, she said, holding up a finger. If you compliment me right now, I will lose my nerve and will have to reschedule international lying for another day. Understood. You look adequate. Perfect. Let's go be believable. In the car, she ran through the roster like a general briefing troops before battle. Her mother, Denise, warm but relentless, would ask about our timeline, our plans, whether I intended to make things official. Her father, a retired contractor named Walter, would be quieter, watching more than talking, forming his own conclusions. Her grandmother, Rosalind, 81 years old and utterly without mercy, would ask questions designed to expose weakness. Her cousin Sienna, the actual guest of honor, would be too wrapped up in her own engagement to interrogate anyone, which Harper considered our best chance of survival. Basic facts, Harper said, counting on her fingers. We met at work. We've been seeing each other 3 months. You're a landscape architect, which sounds stable and outdoorsy, so my mother will love that. Keep answers simple. Do not, under any circumstances, mention that you once cried during a nature documentary about migrating elk. That was one time, and it was a very moving documentary. Noted and banned. What's our first date story? She paused, and something flickered across her face, quick and unguarded. Dinner at that Italian place on Haywood. You ordered for both of us because I said I trusted your taste, and then you got it wrong and I still ate it because I didn't want to hurt your feelings. That's oddly specific for a fake memory. I've had time to think about it, she said, looking out the window instead of at me, and something in my chest tightened at the idea that she'd built us a memory that detailed, that particular, like she'd been rehearsing something she wanted to be true. Her parents' house was a two-story colonial with warm yellow lights spilling from every window and a wraparound porch crowded with rocking chairs. Cars lined the street. Somewhere inside, a dog was barking with real enthusiasm. Last chance to back out, Harper said, hand on the door handle. Absolutely not. I brought wine. I'm committed. That's the spirit. We walked up the path together, and about halfway there, without any warning, Harper reached over and laced her fingers through mine. Smile like you mean it, Reeves, she murmured, or my mother is going to smell the lie from the porch. I looked down at our joined hands, at her fingers fitting against mine like something that had been practicing in secret for a long time, and something in my chest rearranged itself without my permission. I can smile, I said. Smiling is not my problem. What's your problem? I'll tell you after dinner. She glanced at me, curious, but the front door swung open before she could ask anything else, and a tall man with silver hair, a flannel shirt, and the unmistakable posture of someone who had spent 30 years building things with his hands stood in the doorway. He looked at Harper first, warm and unguarded. Then his eyes moved to me, to our joined hands, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked less like surprise and more like recognition, like a man confirming a suspicion he'd been carrying for weeks. Well, he said, stepping forward and extending his hand to me with both of his own, gripping firmly. Welcome to the family, son. I froze. Beside me, Harper made a small strangled sound that could have been a laugh or a cry for help. Dad, she said, we haven't even sat down yet. I know a good thing when I see it standing on my porch, Walter said, still shaking my hand like he intended to keep doing it indefinitely. Your mother's been talking about this young man for weeks. Come in, dinner's almost ready. I looked at Harper. Harper looked at me. Her expression was the exact face of a woman watching her carefully constructed lie develop a life of its own and start making decisions without her. Welcome to the family, I repeated under my breath as Walter ushered us inside. That escalated fast. I told him we were seeing each other, Harper hissed. I did not tell him to adopt you. Too late now. This is a disaster. This is, I agreed, extremely funny, and I would like that on the record before things get worse. The inside of the house smelled like roasted chicken and cinnamon, warm and lived in. Family photos crowding every wall, a real fire crackling in a stone hearth despite it being a mild evening. Because apparently Walter Callahan believed a fire made any occasion more official. A golden retriever the size of a small horse barreled toward us the second we crossed the threshold. That's Biscuit, Harper said, crouching to scratch the dog's ears despite her dress. He has no boundaries and no shame. I relate to Biscuit. Don't bond with my dog, Reeves. We agreed this was temporary. Biscuit doesn't know that. From the kitchen came a voice, bright and delighted. Is that them? Walter, is that them? A woman appeared in the hallway, apron dusted with flour, hair the same dark blonde as Harper's, though softened with gray at the temples. She took one look at us, at Harper's hand still loosely tangled with mine from the porch, and pressed both palms to her chest like she'd witnessed something sacred. Oh, look at you two, Denise Callahan said, crossing the hall in 3 quick steps to pull Harper into a hug, and then, before I could brace myself, pulling me into one too. She smelled like rosemary and hairspray and hugged like she meant it. I've heard so much about you, Nathan. Harper never stops talking about your work, the parks, the gardens. She showed me pictures. I glanced at Harper. Harper's ears had gone faintly pink. I may have looked at your company's website, she admitted quietly. For research purposes. For research purposes, I echoed. Don't make it weird. I'm not making it weird. I think it's flattering. It's not flattering, it's reconnaissance. Denise was already steering us toward the dining room. chattering about the roast, about Sienna's fiancé who was, apparently, a lovely boy, if a little quiet, about how thrilled she was that Harper had finally found someone steady after that business with Marcus. A phrase she said with the particular weight of a woman who had opinions about Marcus that she was choosing not to share in front of company. "Who's Marcus?" I whispered to Harper as we followed her mother. Later, Harper whispered back. Much later. The dining room table was long enough to seat 12, already crowded with aunts and uncles, and a small cluster of cousins arguing amiably about whether the wedding should have a live band or a DJ. At the head of the table sat a small, sharp-eyed woman with silver hair pinned into an elaborate twist, wearing a cardigan the color of dried lavender, watching the room with the calm patience of someone who had outlived several administrations and did not intend to be impressed easily. "That's Grandma Rosalind," Harper murmured. "Do not make eye contact until you're ready." "Ready for what?" "You'll know." We were seated across from Sienna and her fiancé, a soft-spoken man named Dev who immediately struck up a conversation with me about golf courses and drainage systems, a topic I could discuss with genuine enthusiasm, which bought me approximately 10 minutes of peace before Rosalind's voice cut cleanly across the table. "So," she said, setting down her water glass with the precision of a woman placing a chess piece. "You're the landscape architect." I straightened. "Yes, ma'am. And how long have you known my granddaughter?" "About 18 months, I said, which was true, at least in the strictest sense. "We've worked together at the firm. And how long have you been seeing her?" Beside me, Harper's fork paused midair. 3 months, I said, sticking to the script, though the number felt oddly small for how long I'd actually been paying attention to Harper Callahan. Watching the way she chewed the end of her pen when she was thinking, the way she hummed under her breath when a project finally clicked into place, the way she said my name like it was a small joke only the two of us understood. 3 months, Rosalind repeated, unimpressed, and already holding hands on the porch like teenagers. "Grandma," Harper said, a warning in her voice. "I'm asking a question, not making an accusation," Rosalind said mildly. "Young man, what are your intentions?" The table went quiet in that particular way tables go quiet when everyone is pretending not to listen very intently. Walter paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Denise leaned forward slightly. Even Dev stopped talking about drainage. I felt Harper's hand find mine under the table, gripping tight. A silent, panicked say something reasonable. I thought about lying smoothly, the way we'd rehearsed in the car, something safe and vague about taking things slow and seeing where it goes. That was the script. That was the deal. One dinner, simple answers, no complications. Instead, I found myself looking at Harper, at the tension in her jaw, at the way she was clearly bracing for me to fumble this, and something in me decided the truth, or at least a version close enough to it, was easier to carry than another lie. "Honestly," I said, "my intention is to keep showing up. I'm not big on grand declarations at family dinners I've technically only just walked into. But Harper's the kind of person who makes an ordinary Tuesday feel like it matters. She corrects my grammar in emails I didn't ask her to read and remembers how everyone on our team takes their coffee, and once threatened to fight a client who was rude to our intern. I don't know what the next chapter looks like yet. I know I want to be in it." Silence. Then Rosalind's mouth curved, slow and reluctant, into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Well," she said, "that's a decent answer." Denise made a small, delighted sound and pressed a napkin to the corner of her eye. Walter nodded like a man confirming a verdict he'd already reached on the porch. And Harper, beside me, had gone very still, staring at me like she was recalculating something she thought she'd already solved. Under the table, her hand tightened around mine. "That was a lot of words for a fake boyfriend," she murmured, so quietly only I could hear. "I improvised." "You improvised an entire speech." I panicked, and it came out sincere. "I'll workshop it." "Don't," she said, and there was something in her voice, something soft and unsteady, that I chose, wisely or not, to file away for later. Dinner unfolded the way family dinners do when there's wine involved, and a table full of people who love each other loudly. Uncle Frank told a long story about his boat that Harper had, in fact, correctly predicted. Sienna and Dev showed off wedding venue photos on a phone that got passed hand to hand. Denise cried twice, once about the roast turning out well and once, unprompted, about how fast her daughters were growing up. I answered questions about my work, about my family, about whether I'd ever consider redesigning the Callahan's backyard, a question I answered with genuine enthusiasm that seemed to surprise Walter, who spent the next 20 minutes describing his drainage problems in loving detail. Somewhere around dessert, Harper's knee found mine under the table, resting there, not moving away, and I told myself it meant nothing beyond the performance we were both committed to. I told myself that several more times than was strictly necessary. "You're good at this," she murmured while her mother was distracted refilling wine glasses. "Good at lying to your family?" "Good at being here," she said, correcting herself, and there was something careful in the way she said it, like she'd almost said something else entirely. "I had a good teacher," I said. "You wrote our whole backstory. I wrote the Italian restaurant story. You wrote the speech about coffee orders and fighting clients for interns. That part wasn't scripted." She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes. I noticed. Before I could ask what exactly she'd noticed, or what she meant by it, Rosalind's voice cut through the table noise again. "Nathan," she said, and I straightened instinctively, some primal instinct recognizing a woman used to being obeyed. "Tell me about your family." "Not much to tell," I said. "My parents live about 2 hours from here. My sister lives in Charlotte. We're close, but we're not what you'd call dramatic. No dramatic family history. My grandfather once got into a 3-year feud with a neighbor over a fence line, if that counts." "It does not," Rosalind said, "but I appreciate the effort." She studied me a moment longer, the same sharp, assessing look she'd given me at the start of the meal, and then, unexpectedly, she reached over and patted my hand where it rested near my plate. "You'll do," she said, like she was signing off on a contract. Harper's dated men who talked more than they listened. "You listen, Grandma," Harper said again, cheeks going pink. "I'm complimenting him. You're editorializing about my dating history in front of him. He should know what he's up against," Rosalind said, unbothered, and turned back to her plate with the finality of a woman who had said everything she intended to say on the subject. Harper leaned toward me, voice low. "I'm sorry. She has no filter. I like her. Everyone likes her right up until she asks about their student loan debt. Has she asked you that?" "She asked Marcus that. He didn't handle it well." "I'm going to need the Marcus story eventually." "Eventually," Harper agreed, and something about the way she said it, like she was genuinely considering telling me, like this wasn't just a performance anymore, but an actual conversation between two people who wanted to know things about each other, made my chest feel unreasonably warm. After dinner, the family scattered into smaller conversations, Uncle Frank cornering Dev about the boat, Sienna and Denise deep in wedding logistics, Walter disappearing to the kitchen to make coffee. Harper caught my sleeve and tugged me toward the back door. 5 minutes, she said. "I need air, and you need a break from being cross-examined." The backyard was dark except for string lights strung between 2 old oak trees, the kind that made everything look softer than it probably was. Biscuit trotted out with us and immediately flopped onto the grass with a contented groan. "So," I said, leaning against the porch railing, "your dad said welcome to the family before I'd even sat down." I noticed. That feels like a lot of commitment for a fake relationship that started 3 hours ago. Harper wrapped her arms around herself, looking out at the dark yard instead of at me. "My dad doesn't say things like that lightly. He liked exactly one of my previous boyfriends, and even that took him 8 months. So I'm ahead of schedule." "You're wildly ahead of schedule," she said, and there was something almost accusatory in it, like I'd broken a rule she hadn't told me about. "Is that a problem?" She was quiet for a moment, chewing her lip, and I recognized the expression, the one she got in meetings right before she said something she'd been holding back. "The problem," she said slowly, "is that none of that speech at dinner felt fake, and I don't know what to do with that." I straightened off the railing. Which part? The part about coffee orders. The part about fighting the client for the intern. She finally looked at me, and even in the dim light, I could see something vulnerable moving across her face. That wasn't in the script, Nathan. I didn't write that. You made that up on the spot in front of my entire family, and it sounded like you meant it. I did mean it, I said, and the words were out before I could second-guess them, before I could retreat back into the safe, reasonable version of myself that didn't say things like that out loud. That's the part one didn't tell you. I've spent about a year very carefully not noticing how much I like you, Harper. Tonight made that significantly harder. She stared at me. Biscuit, oblivious to the tension, rolled onto his back in the grass. You like me? She repeated, like she was testing the shape of the words. I like you, I confirmed. I have for a while. I was managing it fine until you asked me to hold your hand in front of your grandmother, and I discovered I did not, in fact, have it under control. Nathan, you don't have to say anything, I said quickly, already bracing for the conversation to swing back toward professional and safe. Toward this was a mistake. We worked together. Let's forget this happened. This was supposed to be one dinner. I'm not trying to renegotiate the terms. Shut up for a second, Harper said, and stepped closer, close enough that I could see the string lights reflected in her eyes, close enough that Biscuit lifted his head with sudden interest. I asked you to do this because you were the safest option. Someone I trusted, someone who wouldn't make it weird, someone who could get through one dinner without it meaning anything. That's flattering. Let me finish. She took a breath. The problem is it's never felt safe. Not really. Not since about the third month you worked at the firm, when you stayed late fixing a rendering that wasn't even your project because you didn't want me to look bad in front of a client. I've spent a year telling myself that was just you being a decent coworker. It wasn't just that. I know, she said. I know that now. I think I've known it for a while and been very committed to not admitting it, because admitting it felt complicated, and I am extremely bad at complicated. You're the best person I know at complicated. You just solved a seating chart crisis for 40 wedding guests over lasagna. That's logistics. This is feelings. Feelings are worse. Fair, I said, and reached out slowly, giving her every chance to step back, the way I would have with any decision that mattered. She didn't step back. So what happens now? I don't know, she admitted. I asked you here to lie to my family, and instead you told them the truth by accident. And now my grandmother likes you more than she's liked anyone I've brought home in a decade. And my father already called you son, and I have absolutely no idea how to walk that back. Do you want to walk it back? She looked at me for a long moment, and something settled in her expression, some decision arriving slow and certain. No, she said. I really don't. Then she kissed me. It wasn't dramatic or rehearsed, nothing like the careful backstory we'd built in the car. It was soft and a little uncertain at first, like she was still testing whether this was real. And then it wasn't uncertain at all, her hand curling into the front of my shirt, mine finding her waist, both of us apparently deciding at the same moment that the performance was over and this part, at least, was true. When we broke apart, she stayed close, forehead nearly touching mine. For the record, she said, breathless, that was not part of the script. I noticed. I'm not complaining. My family is probably watching through the kitchen window. I glanced back at the house. Sure enough, a curtain in the kitchen window twitched, and I caught the unmistakable silhouette of Denise Callahan pretending very badly not to be spying. They're watching, I confirmed. Of course they are. Harper laughed, pressing her face briefly into my shoulder. This family has no concept of privacy. I'm getting that impression. Are you scared? She asked, pulling back to look at me properly. Terrified, I admitted. You're intimidating on a good day, and your grandmother could probably extract a confession from a federal witness. But I'd rather be terrified with you than comfortable without you. I decided that about 10 minutes into dinner. Her eyes went soft, something vulnerable and unguarded breaking through the sharp, which she usually kept polished and ready. That's a very good answer, Reeves. I've been told I improvise well under pressure. You improvised an entire relationship in front of my grandmother. To be fair, Most of it wasn't improvised. Just the part where I stopped pretending. She smiled, the real one, the one she didn't perform for clients or coworkers, and kissed me again, slower this time, more certain, while Biscuit thumped his tail against the grass like he approved of the outcome. We went back inside eventually, mostly because Denise, unable to contain herself any longer, opened the back door and announced there was pie, in a tone that made it clear the pie was a formality and the real agenda was interrogation. So, she said the second we were seated again, practically vibrating with anticipation. Anything you two want to tell us? Harper glanced at me. I shrugged, leaving the decision to her. Nathan and I are actually dating, she said. For real. Since about 10 minutes ago. The table erupted. Walter let out a bark of laughter and clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to nearly knock me into my pie. Denise burst into tears again, this time with real conviction. Uncle Frank demanded to know what that meant about the last 3 hours, and Sienna, delighted to no longer be the only romantic drama in the room, immediately started asking Harper 100 questions. Only Rosalind remained calm, watching the chaos with the satisfied expression of a woman who had suspected this outcome from the moment she'd shaken my hand. I knew it, she said, to no one in particular. Nobody gives a speech like that about coffee orders unless they mean it. You knew? Harper asked. I'm 81, dear, not blind. Rosalind lifted her wine glass in a small, private toast toward me. Welcome to the family, young man. Properly this time. I thought about the last 3 hours, about walking in as a fabricated boyfriend and leaving as something entirely real, about the particular chaos of a family that hugged too hard and asked too many questions and somehow made all of it feel like an invitation instead of an interrogation. Thank you, I said, and meant it completely. The drive home was quiet in the way that meant something. Not the awkward kind of quiet, but the kind where two people are both replaying the same evening and arriving at the same conclusions. So, Harper said eventually, watching the streetlights slide past the window. That went differently than planned. Understatement of the year. I asked you to fake a relationship for one dinner, and somehow we ended up in an actual one before dessert. To be fair, your grandmother forced my hand. I panicked and told the truth. You should panic more often. It suits you. She reached over and rested her hand on my forearm at a stoplight, the same easy, certain touch I'd been quietly craving for over a year without letting myself admit it. Can I ask you something? Anything. How long, actually? You said a while, at dinner. How long is a while? I thought about lying, minimizing it, keeping things light the way I usually did. Then I thought about the last 3 hours and decided lying wasn't really an option anymore. About 10 months, I said. There was a Tuesday you brought me coffee because I'd had a rough client call, and you didn't even mention it, just set it down and walked away like it wasn't a big deal. It was a big deal. I went home and reorganized my entire opinion of you that night. Harper was quiet for a moment. I remember that Tuesday, she said softly. I brought you coffee because you looked like you needed it, and then I spent the rest of the day annoyed at myself for caring that much about whether you were having a bad day. So we've both been quietly losing our minds for months. Apparently. She laughed, a little disbelieving. We could have saved ourselves so much time. Where's the fun in that? You call almost a year of unnecessary suffering fun? I call it thorough, I said. I like to be sure about things. And are you sure now? I glanced over at her, at the soft, hopeful uncertainty in her expression that she rarely let show, and felt something in my chest settle into place like a piece that had been missing for a long time. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. Which is terrifying, considering 3 hours ago I was supposed to be lying to your entire family. You were a very convincing liar, she said. Right up until you weren't lying at all. I blame your grandmother. Everyone blames my grandmother. She considers it a compliment. The weeks that followed were a strange, wonderful adjustment, learning how to be an actual couple after skipping the part where you're supposed to figure out if you even want to be one. At work, we were careful at first, a little too careful, overcorrecting into stiff professionalism that fooled absolutely no one. especially not our project manager, Diane, who caught us sharing a laptop charger under my desk during a Tuesday meeting and simply said, "Finally," before moving on to the next agenda item, like she'd been waiting for confirmation for months. "Is it that obvious?" Harper asked afterward, mortified. "Diane sees everything," I said. "She once predicted a client's divorce from a paint color choice. That's unsettling. That's Diane." We disclosed things properly, filled out whatever HR paperwork existed for two coworkers dating without a supervisory relationship between them, which turned out to be a single form neither of us had known existed until Diane produced it from a folder with the efficiency of a woman who had clearly been prepared for this outcome for a while. Nobody in the office seemed remotely surprised. Apparently we had been, in the words of our receptionist, so obvious it was almost rude to everyone still single. 6 months, Diane said, sliding the form across her desk for us to sign. "That's how long the office pool has been running. Congratulations, you've cost half of accounting a significant amount of money." "There was a pool?" Harper asked, scandalized. "There is always a pool," Diane said, as if this were a basic law of physics. "Gerald had you at 8 months. He's very upset right now." "I feel personally responsible," I said. "You should. He was counting on that money for a hot tub." We laughed about it the whole walk back to our desks, but underneath the joke there was something steadying about it. The sense that our coworkers, the people who watched us eat lunch together and argue about font choices and pass each other coffee without being asked, had seen the truth of it long before either of us said it out loud. It made the whole thing feel less like a secret we'd been keeping and more like a fact everyone else had simply been waiting for us to catch up to. Not everyone found it charming, though. About 3 weeks after the disclosure form, Martin Ashby, our firm's managing partner, called us both into his office on a Thursday afternoon, his expression carefully neutral in the way that always meant trouble. "I want to be clear, this isn't a reprimand," he started, which is the exact sentence that precedes every reprimand in the history of office culture. "But a client mentioned yesterday that the two of you seemed, and I'm quoting here, awfully cozy during a site walk. I need to know this isn't going to affect deliverables." "It hasn't," Harper said evenly. "Every project we've worked on together this quarter has come in on time or early. I'm aware. I'm simply raising it because perception matters, and I'd rather address it now than after a client complaint." I felt my jaw tighten, the old instinct to stay quiet and reasonable rising up automatically. The same instinct that had kept me filing my feelings away for a year instead of doing anything about them. But something about watching Harper sit up straighter beside me, unwilling to shrink for anyone, made it easier to find my own spine. "With respect, Martin," I said, "Harper's design work on the Ashcroft project won us that contract. My schedule management kept it under budget. If a client noticed we work well together, I'd call that an asset, not a liability." Martin studied us both for a long moment, and then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth twitched. "Fine. Noted. Carry on. But if I catch either of you arguing about brass finishes in the materials library again where clients can hear, we're having a different conversation." "That was one time," Harper said. "It was memorable," Martin said, and waved us out. In the hallway, Harper let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. "That could have gone worse. It could have gone a lot worse. You were terrifying in there, by the way. I liked it. I've had practice being terrifying. It's mostly bluffing with good posture. Works on me every time." Family dinners became a regular occurrence, no longer requiring rehearsed backstories or careful vetting of which anecdotes were safe to share. I learned that Marcus, Harper's ex, had once tried to convince her family he was allergic to Rosalind's cooking to avoid attending dinners, a lie so transparent and cowardly that Rosalind still brought it up with visible relish whenever his name came up. I learned that Walter's boat obsession had started because his own father never let him near boats growing up, a detail that made Uncle Frank's endless boat stories feel less annoying and more like a family inheritance nobody could quite escape. I learned that Denise cried at almost everything: weddings, engagements, particularly good casseroles, and had apparently cried the entire drive home the night of our first real dinner because, in her words, she'd just known. I brought Harper home to meet my own parents a month later, my mother immediately deciding Harper was her favorite person alive within roughly 15 minutes, my father engaging her in a lengthy debate about whether landscape design counted as real architecture that Harper won decisively by the end of dinner. My sister texted me afterward. Finally, someone who can keep up with you. Don't screw this up. Your family is much quieter than mine, Harper observed on the drive home. Your family operates at a volume mine hasn't achieved since a wedding in 2015. Is that a complaint? It's an observation. I like the volume. It's like walking into a room that's already warm. She smiled at that, reaching over to lace her fingers through mine on the console, an easy, unremarkable gesture that had somehow become the most reliable comfort in my week. The Marcus story finally came out on a rainy Tuesday about 2 months in, the two of us tangled together on my couch with a movie neither of us was really watching. I'd asked, gently, not pushing, and Harper had gone quiet for a moment before deciding, apparently, that I'd earned the whole thing. Marcus and I dated for a year and a half, she said, tracing idle circles on my forearm. He was charming in the way that only reveals itself as a problem in hindsight. Charismatic at parties, distant everywhere else. He'd cancel plans and make it sound like I was the unreasonable one for minding. He met my family exactly once, made a joke about my grandmother's age that landed like a lead balloon, and then spent the rest of the dinner sulking because nobody laughed. That tracks with the fake allergy story. He wasn't even subtle about it. Claimed a sudden shellfish allergy the next time we were invited, and my mother, bless her, spent 40 minutes making him a special plate before Sienna let it slip that she'd seen him eating shrimp cocktail at a work event the week before. Rosalind must have had opinions. Rosalind still brings it up at least once a holiday. She calls him the shellfish boy, like it's his legal name. Harper shifted closer, resting her head against my chest. The worst part wasn't even the lying. It was that by the end, I'd started shrinking myself around him. Smaller opinions, smaller reactions, agreeing to plans I didn't want just to avoid the sulking. I didn't notice I was doing it until after we broke up and I realized how loud I'd let myself be again. I tightened my arm around her. For what it's worth, I like you loud. I know, she said. That's part of why this whole thing terrified me so much. You never once asked me to be smaller. Not at dinner with my family, not at work, not now. I kept waiting for the moment you would, and it never came, and I didn't know what to do with that. I'm not going to start now, I said. I like the version of you that argues with your grandmother and threatens clients on behalf of interns and corrects my grammar in emails I didn't ask her to read. I'm not interested in a quieter version. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick. That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in a while. I have more where that came from. I've been saving them up for about a year. She laughed, wet and surprised, and pressed her face into my shoulder, and I held her there until the movie ended and neither of us had any idea what had happened in it. 6 months in, we hit our first real disagreement, the kind that had nothing to do with fake relationships or grandmothers and everything to do with two people learning how to actually navigate a life together. A client project went sideways, a miscommunication between marketing and design that cost the firm a weekend of scrambling, and in the heat of trying to fix it, we snapped at each other in a meeting in front of half the office, the kind of sharp, unguarded exchange that made everyone else suddenly very interested in their laptops. We didn't speak much for the rest of that day. That evening, she showed up at my apartment with takeout and an expression that suggested she'd been rehearsing an apology the whole drive over. I don't want to become the couple that lets work follow us home, she said, standing in my doorway, container of noodles in hand like a peace offering. I got defensive today because I was embarrassed about the mix-up and I took it out on you, and that wasn't fair. I wasn't exactly gracious about it either, I admitted, stepping back to let her in. I think I panicked a little. Watching you and me argue in front of Diane felt like a preview of every worst-case scenario I'd been avoiding by staying reasonable and safe for the last few years. We're allowed to argue, Nathan. That's not a red flag. It's just Tuesday. I know that logically. Emotionally, my brain went straight to this is how it falls apart. She set the takeout down and crossed the kitchen to where I was standing, wrapping her arms around my waist, resting her head against my chest. It's not falling apart, she said. We had a bad day and a public argument about copy deadlines. That's not a crisis. That's just two people who care enough about their work to fight about it. I like that framing. I workshopped it on the drive over. I kissed the top of her head, feeling something in my chest unclench that had been tight since the meeting. For what it's worth, I'd rather have bad days with you than easy ones with anyone else. That's dangerously close to a greeting card. I contain multitudes. She laughed, muffled against my shirt, and the tension of the day finally broke completely. We ate noodles on the kitchen floor because neither of us wanted to bother with the table, and somewhere between the pot stickers and the second round of apologies neither of us really needed to make any more. We agreed on a rule: no letting arguments follow us home unspoken. If one of us was upset, we said so. If one of us needed reassurance, we asked for it plainly instead of performing fine for 3 days and letting it fester. It wasn't a dramatic rule. It didn't come with fireworks or a grand declaration. But it was the kind of rule that actually held, the kind two people build when they've decided a relationship isn't a performance anymore, but something they're choosing deliberately, again and again, on the good days and the difficult ones. Marcus resurfaced, as exes tend to do, about 9 months in, during Sienna's bridal shower, of all places, having apparently been invited by a cousin who hadn't gotten the memo about his history with shellfish and shrinking Harper down to a smaller version of herself. He showed up in a blazer that looked like it cost more than my car, offered Harper a smile that clearly still expected to be effective, and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "Harper Callahan. Look at you. Still running the show, I see." I watched Harper's spine straighten, watched the easy warmth she'd had all afternoon cool by several degrees. "Marcus," she said, "didn't expect to see you here. Sienna's mom invited me. Old family friend and all that." His eyes flicked to me, assessing, the way men do when they're deciding whether to be territorial about something they gave up the rights to a long time ago. "And you are?" "Nathan," I said, extending a hand he shook with more grip than necessary. "Harper's fiancé." The word landed the way I intended it to. Marcus's easy smile faltered, just slightly, just enough to be satisfying. "Fiancé," he repeated. "That's fast." "Not really," Harper said, sliding her hand into mine, present and certain in a way that had nothing performative left in it. "We took our time. It just didn't take as long as some people apparently need." "Careful," Marcus said, laughing like it was a joke, though it clearly wasn't landing as one. "Wouldn't want you to shrink yourself down for the wrong guy again." The words hit exactly the way he intended them to, a small cruelty dressed up as a joke, designed to needle at an old wound. I felt my jaw tighten, but before I could say anything, Harper beat me to it. "I don't shrink for anyone anymore, Marcus," she said, calm and clear enough that a few nearby conversations quieted to listen. "Took me a while to unlearn that habit. You were a good teacher, if it helps. I've since found someone who prefers me at full volume." Marcus opened his mouth, found nothing useful to say, and settled for a stiff nod before excusing himself toward the punch bowl with considerably less swagger than he'd arrived with. "That was satisfying," I murmured. "That was 3 years of therapy talking," Harper said, though her hand was trembling slightly in mine. "I didn't expect to see him. I'm a little rattled." "You didn't look rattled. You looked like you were reading him his rights." "Good. That's the effect I was going for." She exhaled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders as she leaned into my side. "Thank you for not making it a whole thing. I know some guys would have wanted to make a scene." "I considered it," I admitted. "Briefly. But you clearly had it handled, and honestly, watching you handle it was better than anything I could have said." She smiled up at me, and later that evening, once the shower had wound down and we were back in my car, she turned to me with an expression somewhere between grateful and thoughtful. I used to think loving someone meant slowly disappearing to fit whatever shape they wanted, she said. You never once asked me to do that. I don't think I've properly thanked you for it. You don't have to thank me for not being a bad person, Harper. No, she agreed. But I can thank you for being a good one. There's a difference. She reached over and laced her fingers through mine on the console, the same easy gesture that had become the steadiest comfort in my week. I love you. I don't think I say it enough. You say it plenty. I like hearing it regardless. I love you, she said again, just because, and I decided right then, driving home under a sky gone soft and purple with early evening, that I was going to make this permanent as soon as I possibly could. A year after that first engagement dinner, we found ourselves back at the Callahan house, this time for Sienna's actual wedding reception, held in the same backyard with the same string lights strung between the same old oak trees, Biscuit weaving between guests' legs in search of dropped hors d'oeuvres. Rosalind found me by the dessert table, cane in one hand, glass of wine in the other, watching the dance floor with her usual sharp, assessing expression. You're still here, she observed. I am. A year is longer than I expected, given how the whole thing started. You knew it started as a lie? I knew within about 4 minutes of shaking your hand, she said, unbothered. Nobody looks that nervous about a relationship they're actually confident in. But I also knew, within about 20 minutes, that the nerves weren't about lying. They were about being caught wanting something you talked yourself out of. I stared at her. You figured all that out over appetizers? I'm 82, dear. I've had a lot of practice reading people who are pretending. She patted my arm, the same gesture she'd used the first night, the one that had felt like a verdict. Are you going to marry my granddaughter? Or are we going to keep having this conversation every family gathering until one of you does something about it? I nearly choked on my drink. That's a conversation I'm planning to have with Harper directly. Good. Don't wait as long as you waited to admit you liked her. We're not getting any younger, some of us more literally than others. Across the yard, Harper caught my eye from where she stood with Sienna, laughing at something, hair catching the string lights the same way it had that first night. And I thought about Rosalind's question, about the ring I'd already picked out and hidden in the back of my sock drawer, about the way this family had taken a lie and turned it, somehow, without meaning to, into the truest thing in my life. Soon, I told Rosalind. I promise. See that you do, she said, and shuffled off toward the dance floor with the satisfied air of a woman who had once again correctly predicted the future. 2 months later, I brought Harper back to the Hartwell house, not for a family dinner this time. Just the two of us, on a quiet Sunday evening under the same string lights, Biscuit dozing nearby, Denise and Walter conveniently absent on a trip they'd been suspiciously easy to convince to take. This feels like déjà vu, Harper said, looking around the empty yard. Are we reenacting our first fake date? Something like that, I said, and got down on one knee. Her hand flew to her mouth. Nathan, I know we started this whole thing as a lie, I said, pulling the small box from my pocket, my hands steadier than I expected them to be. One dinner, a script, a story about an Italian restaurant that never actually happened. But somewhere in the middle of pretending, I stopped pretending, and I don't think I've stopped being sure about you since. Your grandmother's been asking me for months when I was going to make an honest man out of myself, and I figure it's time I did. Harper laughed, tears already gathering, one hand still pressed to her mouth. She's been asking you too? Relentlessly. I think she has a betting pool with Uncle Frank. That absolutely tracks. She dropped to her knees in front of me, taking my face in both hands before I could even finish the question. Yes, she said. Nathan, yes, obviously yes. Ask me the actual question so I can say it properly. I laughed, steadying myself. Harper Callahan, will you marry me? For real this time. No script, no backstory, no lying to anyone, especially not your grandmother, who would absolutely find out. Yes, she said again, closing the distance between us and kissing me before I'd even fully gotten the ring out of the box. Yes, 1,000 times yes, and also hurry up because Biscuit is about to eat the box. I got the ring on her finger just in time, Biscuit thoroughly disappointed by the missed opportunity, and Harper stared down at her hand like she still couldn't quite believe it, then back up at me with an expression I recognized from that very first night, soft and unguarded and entirely without performance. For the record, she said, this is a significantly better ending than the one I planned when I asked you to fake a relationship for one dinner. For the record, I said, I think your dad called it before either of us did. He did, she admitted, laughing through tears. Welcome to the family, indeed. We told her parents the following week, Denise bursting into the kind of tears that required 2 tissue boxes, Walter shaking my hand with both of his own again, exactly like that first night, saying, knew it the second you walked up that path. Rosalind, when she heard, simply raised her wine glass in the same small private toast she'd given me a year earlier, and said, finally, with the deep satisfaction of a woman collecting on a very long bet. We got married the following spring, in that same backyard, under those same string lights, Biscuit wearing a small bow tie that lasted exactly 4 minutes before he chewed it off. Rosalind gave a toast that included the phrase I told you so no fewer than 3 times, and by the 3rd round of applause she'd fully abandoned her note cards and was simply narrating the entire courtship from memory, correcting herself twice, and once pausing to ask Walter what year the shrimp cocktail incident happened, purely for accuracy. Denise cried through the entire ceremony and most of the reception, then cried again during the first dance, then a 3rd time when Biscuit was allowed to walk partway down the aisle for the recessional, which nobody had planned and everybody agreed afterward had been the best part. Walter stood beside me before the vows and said, quiet enough that only I could hear, you made an honest woman of my daughter and an honest man of yourself in the process. Not many people manage both. I had good coaching, I told him. Your whole family, honestly. I walked in planning to lie for one dinner, and your mother-in-law had me confessing my feelings before dessert. That's Rosalind for you, Walter said, laughing. She's never once let a lie survive her dinner table. Not in 50 years. I should know. I proposed to Denise at that same table, and her mother knew I was going to before I'd even worked up the nerve. Runs in the family, apparently. Runs in the family, he agreed, and clapped me on the shoulder the exact same way he had that first night on the porch, before I'd said a single true word to any of them, before the lie had even had a chance to fall apart. I think about that first dinner often, about the version of myself who almost said no, who nearly let one more safe, reasonable decision keep him from the thing he actually wanted. I think about Harper gripping my hand in the driveway, whispering instructions about smiling convincingly, about how the lie fell apart within the first 10 minutes, because apparently I am a terrible liar the moment real feelings are involved. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a favor, a fake relationship, a rehearsed backstory about an Italian restaurant that never existed, and a father who takes one look at you on his porch and decides, correctly, before you've even said a single word, that you belong there. I think about how close I came to saying no that Friday afternoon, how easy it would have been to protect myself with one more reasonable excuse, one more safe decision filed away next to all the others. I think about how little it actually took to unravel a year of careful distance, just a hand slipping into mine on a dark porch step and a grandmother who refused to let a lie sit comfortably at her table. Some people spend years working up the courage to say what they mean. I got lucky. I got a family that dragged the truth out of me before I'd even finished my first glass of wine. Harper still teases me about it. Usually at family dinners. Usually right as Rosalind is mid-story about the shrimp cocktail or the coffee order speech. And every time she does, she reaches for my hand under the table the exact same way she did that very first night. Like some habits are worth keeping even after the performance is long over and only the truth is left standing. These days, when people ask how we got together, Harper usually gives the short version. Coworkers, one dinner, a grandmother with no patience for lies. She leaves out the part where I nearly said no, where an entire year passed with both of us quietly, stubbornly pretending not to notice each other, where it took a porch light and a whispered warning about smiling convincingly to finally shake something honest loose. I like to think that's the part that actually matters. The almost, the nearly missed chance. The reminder that sometimes the bravest thing a careful, reasonable man can do is agree to one small, ridiculous favor and let the truth do the rest. What would you have done if your coworker asked you to pretend to be her boyfriend for one dinner, and her father welcomed you to the family before you'd even sat down at the table? Have you ever had a small lie turn into the truest thing in your life? Tell your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.